Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
Doing all right. We're here coming to you the day of NFL roster cutdown. So this day, if you go anywhere on the interwebs, is full of emotions and opinions.
Yes, as opposed to all those other days on the internet that are not full of emotions
Where
and
it's
opinions.
all,
a utopia.
calm discourse, reasoned arguments.
Oh, yes. It's just today, is the exception. But anyway, yes, today was roster cutdowns day. Now, obviously, very tough for a lot of people around the NFL. You hope all the players who were released from the Packers are able to catch on somewhere else or make the practice squad. But today we have, finally the roster, the 53-man roster, although, for now, there are obviously going to probably be, some waiver claims, a couple bits of movement.
The initial 53.
The initial 53. But anyway, we're here to react to the initial 53. We're going to talk a little bit through the offense and then the defense. Before we get into that, though, just want to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out. We tweet out, research that we're doing when we're doing research for these episodes. Packers roster move, Packers news, Packers injury reports, content from other content creators that we really enjoy. Pretty much one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. And then subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube. There are a couple of issues with the YouTube right now that we are working through. So just know that we know about that and we're working on it. It's a deal with the distributor that we're using, but we're going to try and figure that out for you guys. But anyway, Apple, Spotify, Google should all be working, and YouTube we're going to hopefully figure out shortly. But so yeah, subscribe wherever you can. Subscribe everywhere. Leave a rating, leave a review, leave a comment. We love talking with everyone. So yeah, just give us feedback. We love talking Packers with the whole Packer Nation. Best fans in the world. But Dad, before we get into anything else you want to throw out there, should we start talking about this 53-man roster?
Well, I think what I want to throw out there is probably comments on the roster. So I guess we should get started.
I guess we should. Let's start off, though, Dad, with a couple of IR moves. And these are always unfortunate. A couple of these specifically. So both A.J. Dillon and Tyler Davis were put on injured reserve without the opportunity to return. So their 2024 season with the Packers, at least, is done. Now, they might reach an injury settlement with the Packers and then could sign somewhere else, but that would end their time with the Packers anyway. So their 2024 season with the Packers is done. Really tough for Dillon, such a fan favorite, and this probably signals that his time in Green Bay is done. Maybe they re-sign him next year, but he was on just a one-year deal. And then Tyler Davis, it really sucks as well because he just can't seem to stay healthy, back-to-back years where he ends up missing the season. Dad, I'm a bit surprised on the Dillon one. I know that stinger was something that he dealt with last year. Matt LaFleur said they're looking into it, getting other opinions, but it seems like it was more serious than we initially thought, huh?
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing that can have some it's such like a little bit of a nerve damage injury. And so it kind of depends how severe it is. But I am surprised that they had one of the IR spots for return available to them. Mm-hmm. They only used one. And so that was a little surprising. And maybe they'll both end up getting some kind of settlement.
Yeah, and then be able to catch on somewhere else. And then be able
to sign somewhere else, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that IR for return, designation for return, Jonathan Ford, they used the return spot on him, which may be a little bit surprising given the defensive tackle room and given, the players that they have there. But yeah, like you said, I think the biggest surprise is not using one on Dillon or Davis, which either indicates that their injuries are more serious than maybe initially thought, or, maybe that they weren't going to make the team anyways. I guess it's hard to know. It's impossible to know.
Right. But they didn't cut them, right? They put them on season-ending IR rather than cut them with an injury designation.
So I actually have...
Or because they're vested, they're veterans, it's different?
Yeah, this is something Andy Herman tweeted out. You cannot just release either of them. You need to work out an injury settlement. Both are vested veterans, so you can't waive them injured either. Okay. So you have to go through that. So that's why they put them on IR.
So it has a different process. So yeah, it could mean that they are planning to let him go, but they have to come to some kind of injury settlement.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't mean that their year is over necessarily. They could catch on somewhere. And Davis, it seemed like I was surprised that his injury was
as serious as
serious as this.
Yeah, I know. I was as well because, it kind of seemed like I didn't notice him getting hurt in that Broncos game. Did you?
I don't think so. So, I'm surprised they, so we can talk about the number of tight ends they went with as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that they, weren't interested in, I mean, maybe it's a very serious shoulder injury, but you would have thought, coach's staff always very high on him. They're always high on his special teams ability. They only kept 3 tight ends in the end. It's interesting that they didn't designate him for return. Didn't designate either of them for return. But anyway, that's really all there is to talk about that. It mostly just stinks for all 3 of those guys, but specifically Dylan and Davis. Might be the last time we see them in the green and gold, which is always tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for the designated to return, Jonathan Ford
has to miss at least 4 weeks.
And I wonder if he's more of, even though the D-line room is getting kind of full, maybe it's a look to the future for beyond this year, so that they can keep him on the roster, and then he would play more next year than we might expect him to play this year.
I mean, he certainly looked the best he's ever looked this camp and this preseason. I think he looked like he had more juice and explosion than he's ever had. So maybe they just think that there's something there, and he showed them a little something, and they're just, it's always good to have depth. They always say we don't know what our needs are going to be in 6 months. Like, anything can change at any time. But anyway, that does it for the injured players there. Obviously, hope they can either catch on somewhere else or heal up and maybe get re-signed here next year. But Dad, let's move on to the offense, and we're just going to go position group by position group and give our thoughts. I'll read off each one, and then you can go ahead and give your initial thoughts, and then I'll give mine. But starting off with the quarterbacks, and actually something that we did not yet get a chance to talk about, and that is that the Packers have actually made a trade since the last time that we talked, trading a 2025 7th-round pick for quarterback Malik Willis from the Titans. He had previously been a 3rd-round pick in 2022. What you need to know about him is he's a super athlete, dual threat type quarterback, really live arm, but definitely a bit of a raw and developmental prospect. Dad, any thoughts on Malik Willis? Or should we just talk about the quarterback room in general? I'll just read off the quarterbacks as well. They kept 2 quarterbacks on the 53, which were Jordan Love and Malik Willis, who they traded for. So that means that they cut both Pratt and Clifford, Dad. So thoughts on Malik Willis, thoughts on them cutting Pratt and Clifford. And also, I just wanted to point out that Bill Huber wrote per Sports Illustrated that they expect to get Sean Clifford back on the practice squad, but not Michael Pratt, which is maybe a bit surprising. Go any direction you want with this. You can go Willis first, Pratt and Clifford. What are your thoughts on all that?
You don't think I need to go Love first? Top of the list?
I mean, that's QB1, baby. That's QB1. That's all you need to know.
QB1 overall. League-wide.
Hey, why
QB1.
Not? Besides Mahomes. We're not going to get too crazy here.
Well, we're not.
Go big or go home, I guess? No, it's
maybe
anyway.
I was in the sun a long time today.
Yeah, fair enough. But anyway, thoughts on, I think we're mainly talking about here the Willis, Pratt, Clifford conversation, and so I think it's interesting.
Yeah, there are a few things that surprised me here. I was also surprised that to hear the report that they're expecting to get Clifford back, but not Pratt. I would have, maybe gone the other way. I wish I had stuck to my guns that the QB was one not on the roster. That
you tried to call it, and then I
backed off on my very last receiver. Though I still actually, even in that one, when I had the QB not on the roster, I had 3 QBs. Mm-hmm. So I had, I think I had Pratt though, and not Clifford in that. So I still would have been wrong.
You're like, if only I was wrong in a different way, is what you're saying. If only I was some other kind of wrong.
It would have looked better if I was a different kind of wrong. I could have had a little bit more, I guess, more cred if I was wrong in a different way. How's that?
You just got to stick to your convictions. You just got to stick with your guns. But I was also surprised about the Clifford over Pratt. My thought was just like maybe they see both Willis and Pratt as developmental guys, and so they didn't want 2 developmental guys, and they like Clifford more on the whiteboard and in the meeting rooms and, that kind of stuff. And he knows the offense better. He's been in the offense for over a year longer, so maybe that's it. I don't know.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I was expecting them. So if they see Willis as a developmental QB, which seems to be the case, and something you actually mentioned that I think when they first signed, like, oh, are we sure he's QB2? Maybe he's more like a developmental QB3. And I was expecting them to add an experienced QB as a number 2 rather than another developmental QB. So after I thought about your comment this morning, it's like,
can I just say, what if you're giving me too much credit, because what I actually said was, what if they see him as a developmental guy and Pratt is the number 2, because they used a 7th on each of them. And so you're giving me a little too much credit there.
But you did say that, what if they see him as a developmental I was thinking about that this morning. It's like, they might add another new QB so that they'll be adding a developmental guy that they like better than their, Clifford or Pratt. And then they'll add a real backup QB.
Yeah, and
So
I
I
just
was
want
thinking
to.
that there would be another 2 new QBs added just this week,
Yeah, and I
which
just
could
want
still
to
happen.
add a little bit more from that article that Bill Huber wrote for Sports Illustrated. He wrote that they expect Clifford back on the practice squad, and that they expect to promote Clifford week 1 and have him be the quarterback too, because Willis will have been in the building for like 3 days at this point. And then he wrote something where I think this was more his opinion on it or his read on it, and it was like he thinks that that battle is not yet settled in terms of like which one of them is going to be the QB2 for the rest of the season. I think I would imagine Willis is a little bit ahead of him, ahead of Clifford. That is, given that they went out and acquired him, but at the same time, he's behind the 8 ball a bit in terms of knowing this offense. So I think that's probably the main thing keeping Clifford close there.
But Willis has played,
More
regular
years.
season, and NFL snaps.
Yeah, he has more overall NFL experience, but Clifford knows the offense better. So I think I don't know. I could just see a scenario, and I just wanted to touch on that from Huber's article because I thought it was really interesting. But yeah, like you said, I guess maybe, they just really like Clifford, it seems like. They're just really high on him.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll see. I guess they like some aspects about him and maybe he's a guy that helps the other quarterbacks get better.
I think that must be it, because I can't say he was exactly super inspiring in the preseason and in camp. Threw a lot of picks in camp. Didn't have the best preseason games. But, the job of the backup quarterback is obviously to, spot start, knock on wood in case of emergency. But it's also to get the starter prepared. And
right.
so
and also
maybe he's really good at that. Who knows?
Run the practice squad.
Yeah, and be able to pick up other teams' offenses.
Other teams' offenses.
Yeah, because when you're running practice squad, you need to pick up the other team's offenses and be able to run them with reasonable accuracy so that the other team can get prep. And also, I saw an interesting tweet about Malik Willis, and it's like for a team that's playing, in the first 2 weeks, Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson, Malik Willis is a decent player to have on scout team for that kind of opponent.
Yeah, running QB. So maybe
big
he'll
and
be
physical and fast. Yeah,
running the scout team, I should say.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I think it is interesting because I think we both agree Pratt probably looked better in these preseason games than Clifford. But
and Clifford looked rough in the spring and really rough in the beginning of camp.
And he put it together a little bit as time went on.
He started getting better as camp went on.
And I know, the Ravens game was not great for Clifford. I do want to say he was pressured on 40% of his dropbacks, while Pratt was only pressured on 17%. Clifford was throwing 7.2 average depth of target, while Pratt was throwing 4.2. So Clifford was trying to do a little more, even though his numbers look way worse, and he was under pressure a lot more. So I just wanted to add context
and there was a drop.
to that. Yeah. He dropped a snap too, though, so we're gonna even that out.
even those two drops out.
Yeah, so, but he was getting pummeled back there. But anyway, we're not really talking about the Ravens game. Dad, anything else on the
a beating? So there's he stood in there.
Shots.
He stood in there while he got hit multiple times during that game.
Yeah,
so give him some respect
time,
for that.
At the same time, Pratt was out there delivering shots. He almost knocked himself out the game, just trying to lay a hit. So
I was like, "What are you doing?"
I respect it, honestly. You're a backup quarterback. Just send it.
This is true. That reminds me of the text that we got from Eli about the scoring system.
Yeah, if your quarterback gets a tackle in fantasy, you get 100 points. I saw that tweet too. Points. Yeah. But anyway, if we keep taking this long in every position, we're going to be here a while. Is there anything else on the quarterbacks that you want to touch on?
Listeners, I hope you're ready for a long night. Just run it at 2x if you can still understand Tommy by any chance.
We're at 14 minutes and we've gotten through one position, so that's cool. Oh, well, we did the injury report too. So, but yeah, quarterback group. I think the rest of it makes sense. We knew Malik Willis was going to make the team once they traded for him. They wouldn't have traded for him if they thought he'd make it to waivers and make it through to the practice squad. So they obviously were going to keep him on the 53. And then just the Clifford over Pratt's a little interesting, but maybe they just like the intangibles that Clifford brings in terms of preparing everyone else. Hopefully Pratt catches on somewhere else. I imagine he would. He's, pretty well thought of prospect despite going in the 7th round. So we'll see. But let's move on to the running backs though, Dad, where the Packers kept 3. Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, and Marshawn Lloyd. 3 running backs kept. So kind of what we expected. I think the only surprise really is that there was some, speculation that Lloyd might end up on IR with designation to return. But that does not happen. So that's good. And you were speculating something about, you thought it was so that he could be practicing a little bit more.
Yeah. So I had them keeping only 2 running backs on the 53. It was Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson, with Lloyd on designated to return IR. Now, so I thought it was interesting that he didn't go, despite, and this could mean the simple explanation that he'll be ready to go in less than 4 weeks, and so they didn't want to have him sit for 4 weeks. But that's not the only possible reason. It could be that they want to keep him on the active roster so he can keep practicing, since he's missed so much time and missed a lot of training camp and preseason. Because if he's on IR, he can't practice until his 21-day window starts. So he'd have to miss a couple weeks of practice at minimum in order to be on the IR. So they might not want to have his development further stymied. Yeah, stunted.
We almost got the same word. We almost
one of
pulled
those
the
ST
same one.
words.
We were close. But yeah, no, it makes sense. I think we both agree, though, that at the beginning of the year, at least, Emmanuel Wilson will probably be running back 2, just given the fact that Lloyd had such a stop and start training camp in terms of, being out with the hip injury, then coming back, then having 1 carry in a preseason game and pulling his hamstring and then being out. So it's just been kind of, I think, 2 stop and start for him to be ready to contribute right away. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I thought it might be IR, because after getting like a second injury, I thought it might take him a little longer to recover, but so we'll see. Well, and maybe that he still won't play for the first 4 weeks. He'll just be getting more up to speed and be ready by the time that's over.
Yeah, I think otherwise the running backs make sense. There's nothing really else to touch on there.
I think we'll know if they're elevating running backs for the first couple weeks.
And
what the story is.
There are some reports on, potential practice squad. We don't have any official signings there yet. But there was a report
until after noon tomorrow.
Oh, goodness.
There is
think
some
that's right.
kind of cutoff of when waiver claims have to be made, and then everybody becomes a free agent and can be signed.
Yeah.
Except for like the vested veterans can sign right away. They don't.
Yeah, they don't. They're not subject to waivers. But Acme Pack & Co. has a list of like tracking the practice squad signings, and they have a list of reported practice squad interest based on just reporters on Twitter. And they did report that Nate McCrary is someone that the Packers are keeping an eye on and want back on the practice squad as a running back. So
I liked the way he ran in that last preseason game.
He's a good player.
I thought looking good. I liked the way he was stepping out of tackles.
Yeah, I thought both him and Merriweather looked pretty solid, but yeah, I think McCrary looked a little bit better. Let's move on to the tight ends, though, Dad. Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Ben Sims, only 3 tight ends there. I don't really have any thoughts. This is exactly how I had it. They might, they're based on that practice squad reporting as well. It seems that there's interest in bringing back both Joel Wilson and Messiah Swinson on the practice squad. So that's something, but obviously none of those are official yet. Any thoughts on this tight end room? I think it's pretty chalk.
Yeah, I was a little surprised they only went with 3, but maybe with Davis being hurt, they didn't feel like there's anybody they really wanted to spend a 53-man roster spot on. That anybody else that could get into practice squad easily enough and then elevate if they want to have 4. And maybe they're going to elevate another tight end or fullback-ish player.
That's the only thing
for special teams. That's
the only thing I was thinking is like maybe Pearson might have made the team was what I was thinking, because they don't really have a real fullback, H-back on the roster. But seems like they're just going to have, one of those other guys do it, which makes sense as well.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the practice squad ends up being, but I wouldn't be surprised if they elevate somebody from tight end or from linebacker for teams.
Yeah, we'll touch on that.
One of those 2 sort of similar body type players.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, nothing really there in the tight end much to talk about. I'm happy they kept Ben Sims. There was, some thought that maybe they would let him go. I think he's got a little something to him. I think he's got, some juice in terms of athleticism. I think he showed a lot as a blocker last year in terms of like that not being something he was really known as coming out of not the draft, but as an undrafted free agent as a rookie. And I thought he, showed some strides last year. And I think he would be like, I think he'd be a decent tight end too on a lot of teams. The Packers just have some good depth there. Moving on to the receivers, Packers keep 6: Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton, Malik Heath. Shout out to Bo Melton. This is his first time making a 53, his 3rd year in the league.
Yeah, I saw he
so that's exciting.
Tweeted about that.
Yeah, so that's awesome for him. My only real question was, how much thought went into keeping a wide receiver 7 in DeBose. But Heath, after that first preseason game, I think Heath pretty much outplayed him the rest of the way, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I'd say that I had DeBose after I guess it was the second preseason game. DeBose was looking good, but then in practices and the last preseason game, I think Heath was pretty firmly ahead of DeBose in a lot of aspects and was playing really well.
Mm-hmm. And add on to the fact that Heath, looked pretty good last year when called upon in like actual NFL games. They've seen it, so
yeah, they're no longer projecting; they've actually seen what he can do in games. And he provides some toughness. And he was actually a guy coming out of, I guess, Ole Miss and Mississippi State.
I think the other order, but yes,
I didn't have to say the order right, but maybe I was counting backwards.
True, fair enough.
But had done fairly well there, and maybe should have been considered for a draft pick instead of being an UDFA at the time.
Yeah.
But the question is, do the Packers have 4 wide receiver ones or 5?
Oh, is that the question?
That's the question.
Why stop
4
there?
Wide receiver ones or 5?
Let's call it 6.
Or 6.
Screw it. Why not? Okay. Fair enough. It sounds like you're done talking about wide receivers then. And I just
Are you saying I'm not taking this discussion seriously?
And I just wanted to say that, the reported practice squad interest at the wide receiver position was Julian Hicks. Apparently there's some interest there from the Packers. Moving on, though, to the offensive line. Packers keep 10 offensive linemen. Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Jordan Morgan, Sean Ryan, Zach Tom, Jacob Monk, Andre Dillard, Kadeem Telfort, and Travis Glover. Sorry if I stumbled a couple times there. I was trying to read all that.
I always have to stop myself from saying Danny or Donald Glover.
Yeah, fair. But Dad, any thoughts on those 10? Any thoughts on keeping 10? What are your thoughts there?
I either had 9 without Glover or 10 with Glover. So this went almost exactly like I expected. Mm-hmm. And I think this is my last pick, was to go with 10 linemen. It didn't seem like anybody else was really that close. I think there's a pretty significant gap between number 10 and number 11 and 12 in how well they played in the preseason and in training camp. So in terms of questions, I guess we'll see who's actually going to be starting, whether at the beginning of the season. I think it was going to be Morgan for sure until he got hurt. And because he had been taking, before his shoulder injury, he had started taking almost all of the first team right guard snaps, or at least the majority of them. But now it might be they'll go with Ryan for a while, and then we'll see. My guess is Morgan's going to end up winning the job.
Did you see the Matt LaFleur presser about, where he was asked, Andy Herman asked him something about, last year you rotated John Runyon and Sean Ryan. Is that something you could do this year? And he's like, I like where your head's at, which was pretty much like, I like that idea. That's exactly what we're going to do. Thank you. But no, I think they're going to.
Andy Herman, did you just give him that idea?
I do think that, if Morgan had been able to play in even maybe 1 or 2 preseason games, they'd feel comfortable having him be the week 1 starter. But given the fact he hasn't had any game action at all, I don't think he's going to be the starter initially. I think it's going to be Ryan, but I do think they're going to do that rotating thing, and eventually, assuming Morgan outplays him, they'll swing over to Morgan. They've done this with other linemen in the past. Remember they did this with Lane Taylor and Elton Jenkins back when they drafted Elton. They've done this a few different times before, so it's kind of something they're used to. My only thought was, could you have snuck Glover onto the practice squad? Maybe. And gotten someone else through, but
it sounds like some of the players we were thinking that they'd have instead, they're not even
bringing to the practice squad.
Bringing to the practice squad. I guess we'll see what actually happens.
Yeah.
So the other question I have is the swing tackle on the roster?
Well, I don't know if you saw that report from Rob Domofsky where he wrote that they didn't think that the swing tackle was on the roster. Sources had told them that they don't think the swing tackle was on the roster, and I was like, it's kind of surprising because I felt like Dillard did pretty well when playing left tackle. Maybe they just don't like Telfort.
Maybe the answer is they don't actually have a swing tackle.
Yeah, they have a backup left
tackle and a backup right tackle.
Maybe they don't.
And maybe there is no swing tackle to get.
I was going to say, I don't think you're going to find one of those just on the street. They're not going to get cut if they're a viable sixth lineman.
Have you seen the suggestions?
What are the suggestions? Resign Billy Turner? That's the best option in my opinion. He's available.
Oh, no. It's crazier than that.
Oh, okay.
David Bakhtiari.
Oh, I mean, there are worse ideas. Has he ever played right tackle in his life, though?
I think he was going to be right tackle before he went to left tackle.
I can't remember.
But anyway, the idea is more just pie in the sky thinking is this. Not as a terrible idea. It's is there any chance in the world that this could ever happen? Kind of idea.
Yeah, that's I think about that one. I mean, it's there are crazier ideas. I think that wouldn't actually be the worst option because
it's the internet. There are a lot of crazier ideas out there.
They're especially on 53-man cutdown day. Apparently, it's the only day of the year. But I mean, I actually wouldn't hate that. I don't think that'd be terrible.
Oh, I think it'd be great. Yeah, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. In terms of practice squad interest, apparently, though, the two offensive linemen that apparently Packers have shown interest in are Lessida Smith and Donovan Jennings, which kind of makes sense. You know, Smith showed versatility across 3 positions in the preseason games, ability to play some center. And then Jennings was the UDFA that they gave the most money and were clearly highest on. He was just hurt most of camp. So
yeah, though I liked some of his reps in the last preseason game. I was watching him a little bit on some of his run blocking.
Yeah, he was mostly playing left guard, right? Almost exclusively.
Yes, almost exclusively left guard. I think at that point was Lessida Smith playing.
He was playing a lot of center, but I don't remember
center,
where he was.
Right? He was playing center by the end of the game.
I think he was playing center. And
I'm a little surprised that Tenuta isn't on this list.
So notable absences, Tenuta and Royce Newman, both not on this list.
Or Caleb Jones.
So any thoughts on any of those 3 being gone? I can't say. I'm most surprised by Tenuta. I'm a little surprised Royce Newman's gone, but what are your thoughts?
I didn't expect, well...
I've said that for 2 years. I haven't expected Royce Newman to make the team.
Yeah,
so.
And it seemed like there was a chance for Royce Newman after he signed the adjusted contract.
Mm-hmm.
But and just most of the preseason
has been bad.
He struggled. I think he had one game where he did pretty well, but they were playing him like almost the entire game in the preseason games, which is never a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. He was playing into the fourth quarter, but I do think he did that last offseason too, and they kept him. So I don't really know. Caleb Jones, it feels like they gave him 2 years to develop. He didn't really get much better, and now Kadeem Telford's in that spot. So that's or now Glover's in that spot.
Glover, they're moving.
They got
forward.
One developmental tackle project, big man, that they're just kind of rotating through, and it worked with Nyman. Didn't work as well with Jones. We'll see if it works with either Telford or Glover. Anything else along the offensive line you wanted to touch on, Dad? I do think maybe backup tackle's a little bit iffy, and we'll see how Andre Dillard if he's recovered from that shoulder injury yet, because he was missing.
We don't
some time
know,
there.
but they didn't put him on any IR.
Yeah, so hopefully, and they had an IR with designation to return spot open, so it will at least not be 4 weeks, probably. Knock on wood.
That seems more likely than the Lloyd one, which is a little because Dillard's a vet, been in the league, he's kind of knows the deal, while Lloyd is still getting adjusted.
Yeah.
So I expect that Dillard, it probably means that Dillard's close to being ready to go. As for the rest, so the question is the backup right tackle in the starting lineup in the interior?
I think that is also a question. Is the backup right tackle Elton Jenkins? Is it Rasheed Walker and you put Elton Jenkins at left tackle? Is it Jordan Morgan? I don't think we know. And hopefully, knock on wood, we don't need to find out. That's the hope. Hopefully we'll never know. Hopefully that will just remain a mystery.
Yes. But I think that about does it for the offense.
Yeah, that does it for the offense. So that's 2, 5, 8, 14, 24 offensive players. Then 3 specialists makes for 26 defensive players. So a little heavier on defense this year. Let's start with the interior defensive line, Dad. Not a whole lot to talk about. 5 players kept. Kenny Clark, TJ Slayton, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, and Colby Wooden. I have no thoughts at all. This is exactly how we kind of all expected it to go. I didn't expect anyone more or less.
This was about as chalk as it gets. Except the biggest surprise in terms of interior defensive line was Jonathan Ford
on IR to return.
To return.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest surprise. But yeah.
Otherwise, all these guys were
no thoughts at all. In terms of defensive tackle on the reported practice squad interest, James Esther is the only one, which is maybe a little bit surprising. I can't say I noticed him a whole lot, besides the fact that he was wearing a weird number. I think it was like 61 or something. That was like the only thing I noticed about him.
In the last preseason game, and I was like, wait, who is that? I had to look it up.
Yeah, he was like deep in the fourth quarter, but I guess they liked what they saw. So I guess we'll keep an eye on that going forward. Moving on to edge, though, where we have something maybe a little bit more interesting. They kept 6 guys down, which I think is more than we expected. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Lucas Van Ness, JJ Anagbare or Kingsley Anagbare, Brenton Cox Jr., and Aaron Mosby. Dad, your thoughts on that? Yeah,
so I really did not expect them to have more than 5. They'd have to choose between Cox or Mosby. And I also, particularly if they And I also thought it was possible they'd only go with 4, that they'd actually cut both of them to have like a 6th linebacker, for example.
Yeah, and then
which we
elevate off
kept
of practice
expecting.
squad. Yeah.
Right. Especially with the fact that there are, 5 interior defensive linemen as well. And so that makes a total of 11 players for only 4 spots at 4 position spots when they're in base.
And we've seen Wooden have some snaps at edge before, and they
Yeah.
usually have only been keeping 4 active on game day at edge. So, I mean, that is obviously a different defensive scheme, but it's just something that they've done before. So 6 did feel a little heavy. Now, both Cox and Mosby both had very awesome preseasons in camp. So maybe it's just like, hey, these are 2 of our 53 best players. We're going to keep them. Maybe it's just one of those scenarios, but neither of them are real special teams contributors. So I don't.
I know Cox got into some because I was looking at the snaps. So I didn't end up writing his down.
Yeah, it's not like either are like big, massive, like every special teams,
Yeah, it's more like field goal block, but it's very little. But I do think maybe they're being kept on the team for the future. They don't want to lose them, but they want to see if they develop into players who can earn some snaps.
Yeah, and I think they would be like more like the 4th or maybe 5th guy on most teams, but they're just kind of slotted into 5 and 6 because of the roster.
Right, and they may be holding on to them to see, will either one of these guys develop into a 4th edge rusher in a year or 2.
Yeah, and it's something to keep an eye on. I don't really have any other thoughts. Do you want to move on to linebacker?
Yeah, we can move on to linebacker.
Okay, so linebacker only kept 5: Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper, and Tyron Hopper. So I just wanted to add in here, I was surprised by only 5. The notable one is Christian Welch, who there is reporting they are interested in bringing him back on the practice squad. But just the fact that, 3 different things. Despite transitioning to a scheme where you need more linebackers in base, despite Brian Gutekunst saying over the offseason that they're going to keep more linebackers this year, and Christian Welch having a good offseason and a good preseason game and finishing strong, they still kept the same amount of linebackers as last year. It's the same amount. It's exactly 5, just like last year, which is just like, that's mystifying to me. I'm very surprised by that.
Though I was going back and forth between 5 and 6, mostly because I was just balancing out the positions. I was tempted, but never actually put Welch on the 53, but I did think there's a good chance he'd make it just for special teams. And he also showed that he can hold up if you need him to do some snaps.
Yeah. He didn't look totally lost out there. Like, I mean, obviously it's preseason and he's playing against like 2s and 3s and 3s and 4s, but he didn't look like he had no idea what he was doing out there, at least. And he looked like a better mover than I thought he was. Like, he could move side to side a little better. He's not just run down the field as hard as he can in a straight line and try and hit someone, but he can do that too a little bit. So,
Yeah. So that was the surprise there on
linebackers.
Because some of it is, the balance, because they went with, only 5 linebackers, but they had enough room for 6 edge rushers.
And only 5 linebackers despite Edgerrin Cooper missing almost all of camp and not playing in any preseason games. So it's not like he's going to be, super ready to go probably. And Tyron Hopper only played in was only active after the second preseason game, missed half of camp. So I'm very surprised. Only 5 linebackers. Put it that
way, it becomes even more surprising.
Yeah, with both rookies missing most of camp and Cooper not really being ready to even be in 11-on-11 practices yet. And they still only kept 5 linebackers. I actually would say I expect a linebacker added in the next few days. That's my calling my shot. Put a pin in it. I'm calling my shot on that one.
But what I haven't identified are any obvious players who would come off the roster to make room for other players. Because in the past you'd have like a couple players who would go on to IR right after cutdowns, and then their spot would be filled. But now with the new rule, you don't have to do that. And so I was like, where would they?
Mosby or Cox, maybe. Or one of the offensive linemen, maybe. Because if they've said they don't think they're swing tackles on the roster. So,
yeah.
I don't know. Okay, well, let's move on to corners. Packers kept 5. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Corey Ballantyne. Dad, thoughts? It seemed like that last spot was a little up for grabs, huh?
Well, I actually, in the end, thought Ballantyne was pretty safe. They've been trying to train him both in the slot and outside. He played a lot of snaps and did much better than anybody expected last year. Actually, did a decent job, and he plays a fair amount of special teams. But what surprised me was that they only went with 5. I was almost sure they were going to keep a 6th, and I had 6 corners on, I think, almost every one of my predictions in order to get Kalen King on the roster.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I was thinking the last spot was down to, Corey Ballantyne with pro experience, Robert Rochelle with him being the best special teamer. Now, interestingly, they didn't need to waive him injured or anything despite him missing that last game, so they could bring him back on the practice squad. Now, if they had waived him injured, they could not bring him back on the practice squad, so that's something to just keep in mind there. And then, Kalen King having the highest upside. Like you said, I was expecting them to keep 2 of the 3. They only went with 1, which is also a little surprising given that, obviously, knock on wood, but Eric Stokes hasn't been healthy in 2 years. Jair Alexander has missed half of the games in 2 of the last 3 years. Carrington Valentine is hurt right now. So,
yeah. So the one thing I would say is maybe because they have some safeties with some positional versatility,
maybe
that the safeties may help cover the cornerback room as well, particularly in the slot.
Which
Just
of
the
those?
slot.
But
Just
only
the slot.
I think only one of those. Only Bullard can really play the slot. They have not really been doing that with Williams.
They not tried Williams in the slot?
Not after the first 2 weeks of camp. After 2 to 3 weeks of camp, it was pretty much he was rotating at safety, and he can come down in the box. And I think maybe in a pinch he could do it, just based on his profile and what he did at Oregon. But they didn't seem to do that a whole lot with him. They would bring him in at safety and then move Bullard down to the slot. So, but I don't think at outside corner that depth is amazing, given both Stokes and Jair's injury history and Valentine being injured for most of camp.
Yeah, it is a little surprising, but maybe they're going to have Bullard play a lot of slot. They were trying Nixon on the outside a bit.
Yeah, that
and maybe that
did
was
not
the
go
thought
well.
that
did not
if
go
Bullard
well.
if Bullard plays in the slot, and because we have an injury or something.
Don't forget what Keyshawn tweeted, Dad. He's the slot.
I am the slot.
I am the slot. Get over it.
But let's say one of their starting boundary corners is hurt, and the best way to shuffle it around is to put Nixon in outside and Bullard in the slot.
I would rather them go Corey Ballantyne in the outside and keep Keyshawn in the slot. I don't think Keyshawn can play on the outside. I'm good without that. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
I passed on that one.
You'd say that we have 2. If you want to look at it in one way, we have 4 outside corners.
They did a little cross training with Corey Ballantyne as well.
Right, a little bit of cross training, but we have four corners there who can play outside.
Yeah,
and then to back up Nixon, we have Ballantyne and Bullard.
Yeah, I think swap that order, but agreed. I think if Keyshawn missed time, I think they'd go Bullard and put Williams in.
Right. So if you want to think about what the depth is, you do have 2 other players on the bench who can play outside, and you have a couple players who can fill in the slot.
Yeah.
So maybe it's there's a little bit more depth than it appears on the surface. So it does require, there's a smaller number of players total. So that becomes a little bit.
That's what I'm saying is 3 of them have a bit of an injury risk. I'm surprised they only kept 5. It's just all I'm thinking. Yeah. But anyway, anything else on the corners, or should we go to safeties? Last one on the defense.
Sure. Let's go to the safeties.
Okay, safeties. Packers kept 5 again. Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Katano Ladapo, and Zane Anderson. Probably, I would say the most surprising cut, Dad, was Anthony Johnson of the whole team, was Anthony Johnson Jr. Going from at the beginning of camp, rotating in as a starter with Evan Williams and Javon Bullard, where it was the 3 of them in a rotation, and it seemed like he was holding his own, to not even making the team after playing 12 games last year, looking pretty good, looked good in the last preseason game. I was frankly shocked. I was shocked by that cut.
I was as well, because I thought he was looking good. He was playing a lot. I mean, one note I did have was the fact that he was playing so much in that last game a little bit of a red flag, because I think he played a fair number of snaps on defense in the final preseason game. Well, 28. It wasn't that much.
Yeah, it's not too.
It was 32, 26, and 28 in the 3 preseason games, so it wasn't a crazy amount.
But so they chose to go with.
He was looking really good in the preseason games. The reports from camp were good. He was hitting people. He was
laying
the ball.
Mm-hmm. And they chose to go with Zane Anderson over him as a special teams presence. He's really the only true special teams only guy that they really kept. It seemed like, which is maybe a little surprising, fewer than usual. Yeah, we'll talk about special teams in a second. But I'm surprised they didn't keep Johnson. I'm really surprised.
I'm shocked they didn't keep Johnson. I thought there was a chance they would go with 6 safeties, and the sixth one would be Benny Sapp.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, Johnson is the fourth safety, and Oladapo is the fifth, and then they might keep Zane Anderson. That was how I saw it.
Yes.
I was like, and they might keep Zane Anderson.
I thought that Anthony Johnson Jr. was the
clear safety four.
Was the safety four.
Based on everything we'd heard in camp, based on everything we saw in preseason games and joint practices, he was getting reps with the ones for like the majority of camp. I was really surprised, and I think he's going to catch on somewhere, and maybe they can get him back to the practice squad, and it's one of their exemptions. But we'll see. He was not listed in the ones that they have interest in. So
yeah, but that list is not enough to fill up a practice squad.
No, it's not. It's
only it's like only half. So.
And they probably won't even get all of these players. So it's just interesting that I just wanted to note he was not listed there. But yeah, I was shocked about him. Let's I guess we'll finish the special teams, and then we'll just do like a quickly, who were you most surprised of? Because I think Johnson Jr. is clearly the one I was most surprised of. Maybe Kalen King was, and Michael Pratt were probably the other two, given that Goody hates cutting draft picks and cut 2 7th rounders, which we know he hates doing, and he cut 2 of them.
2 this year. 2 picks from this year.
Yeah. But anyway, let's pivot over to special teams, Dad. 3 players kept. Danny Whelan, which we know because they never even brought in another punter, and he did pretty well at that. Matt Orzik, that kind of seemed like after they cut Peter Bowden the first time, it was going to be Matt Orzik the whole way. So he needs to improve this year, though, because he was really struggled last year at long snapper. And then finally, Greg Joseph. Dad, Anders Carlson was released. Really tough rookie year for him last year. Wasn't a whole lot better this training camp. Did kick better as a percentage over the course of training camp than Joseph, but is it fair to say that missed 32-yarder was the nail in the coffin? Do you think that did it? You think that was it? Like if he never kicked that kick, if they never get in field goal range, do you think that he makes the
Joseph
team
out for that one?
Yeah, do you think
they decide to go for it on 4th instead of going for a kick?
Or they just never take that kick and it never happens. Just mind wipe it. Is Carlson the kicker on the team right now?
I was thinking it was maybe. I mean,
we'll never know, but we can pontificate. So
most of this preseason and training camp, I thought Joseph was well in the lead because his percentage was much higher, and when he made it, he was down the middle and not like
so much more confident,
squeaking inside the upright, just like the 54-yarder, 55-yarder. Carlson just squeaked it inside the upright barely, and Joseph was right down the middle.
I was joking with you for Carlson that like even his makes don't inspire even a little bit of confidence, because when he does make it, it's we're not recording the video, but I'm holding my fingers very close together for you listeners on audio, this close to the upright every single time he kicks it.
Yeah, but Joseph went through a real cold streak
this past week. The last week,
the last 2 weeks, I think it was. He dropped like 10 percentage points.
The worst time you could have a cold streak was when he had it, and Carlson still. I saw someone tweet that was like, they tried every which way to have Carlson win this battle, and he still lost it.
I thought Joseph was going to have to beat him by a country mile.
Yeah,
because
we talked about
the job, but apparently was not the case.
We talked about they clearly want Carlson like as the kicker. Like if it's close, they're going to do Carlson because they spent a 5th rounder on him, and then you missed that 32-yarder, and I think it's just like. I mean, we all know the Matt LaFleur
he looked
quote.
Really dejected after that.
Yeah, it sucks for him. Hopefully he can figure it out and put it together like Daniel Carlson did, where after a year or two he figured it out. But it's just like a team that has aspirations can't wait for a kicker to figure it out. He could go to like a team that's like rebuilding, like the Panthers or the Patriots or something like that, and figure it out and take the time and be developed, because I think they're clearly high on his developmental tools, but he's not the kicker for this Packers team, and I honestly don't know if Joseph is either. We'll see if any kickers become available in this coming week that the Packers take an eye on. But
this some of my notes here that maybe it's best for Carlson to develop on a practice squad.
Yeah.
That he's not ready to be a game time kicker, but he needs to work out some of his mechanics or something to become more reliable, and that he can do it in a practice squad. Doesn't mean his career's over now. But is my final comment is this the way the kicker is going to end up, or will they still pick up someone off of waivers? When I first saw that Carlson was cut this morning, I thought there was a chance
they cut
their
both.
initial 53 would have 0 kickers.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was a chance, but yeah,
I mean, just pick up one of the players who was going to become available. They did not make a trade, which was I was half expecting that they would, like they did for the Malik Willis trade. They would trade for one of those kickers before they got cut.
Yeah, I mean, if I was, a betting man, I would have definitely bet on a trade for a kicker over a trade for a quarterback. That would have just been me. But yeah, so Joseph, I think, is the kicker we can say for now, right? But I think we're going to keep a close eye on that position the next 2-3 days.
Matt LaFleur's comments did not inspire confidence.
I mean, he made the same comments about the quarterbacks too. So, and they made a move. So, but yeah, so I do feel more confident in Joseph, despite him kicking a lower percentage in camp than Carlson. Every time Carlson went out there, even the makes felt like he just barely made it, like every single time. At least the makes for Joseph go up down the middle. Like the misses are still bad, but at least the makes go right down the middle. But anyway, anything else on any of the special teamers that you want to touch on? Or do you want to touch on special teams overall as like the players on the roster who might contribute there?
Right. So I did make some notes on outside of the specialists, like who the other core special teamers are going to be. Zane Anderson is clear. He seems to be the only one who is like special teams specific. Like last year, he had 126 snaps on teams and 1 on defense. Other players that had a decent amount of snaps on special teams are Sims, who played like a third of his total snaps on special teams. Eric Wilson, of course, has been one of his core things. He led the team with 307 snaps. Heath played 71 snaps on teams last year, primarily kick return and coverage. Valentine actually played a fair amount, 114 snaps across a bunch of teams. Hopper played a decent amount in college, 412 for his career. Mm-hmm. And the rookie safeties, another kind of body type you might think of. Oladapo played 230 snaps on teams for his career, and Evan Williams 418 for his career.
Yeah, and we know the rookies are going to play a lot of special teams just because they are.
And McDuffie played 202, but do you want 2 of your starting linebackers playing a bunch of teams?
No, I don't.
Does not give me a warm feeling. So I think we're going to see one of them playing fewer special team snaps than they have in the past.
And I'm going to guess McDuffie is not going to play as much special teams because I think it's pretty clear he's linebacker 2, and he was not active for the last 2 preseason games. So they were clearly saving him because they think he's the starter. I did just want to add one name, and that was that Bo Melton was on first team kickoff unit. So he might also be a special teamer.
Yeah, I should have
forward.
Probably mentioned him as well.
Yeah. And then I think, him, both him and Heath in terms of receivers. I think they're both going to play a little teams. And then, I think they're going to be elevating from the practice squad for maybe some special teams only guys, maybe picking some up here and there on the practice squad and just elevating them as needed, I think is also an option.
Right. Like another tight end or
another corner, another safety, another linebacker. We'll see. But yeah, we already talked a little bit about the reported practice squad interest. Obviously, none of that is official, but there is at least some reported interest there. But Dad, let's close this out and talk about just what were your 3 biggest surprises overall from this 53-man roster before we close out here?
So I think number 1 is Anthony Johnson Jr. not making the team. Number 2 for me was 6 edge rushers. Mm-hmm. And number 3 was Kalen King not making the team.
Okay, yeah. For me, it was definitely number 1, Anthony Johnson Jr. not making the team. That I'm still a little confused on that just because, he went from, like I said, start of training camp, you're in the rotation, you're competing for the starting spot, end of camp, it's not like he was terrible during camp. Like you'd think he had just like the worst training camp of all time, going from being rotated in with the starters to not making the team, but he didn't. He had a good camp by all reports. Second is them seemingly, we'll see going forward, having Clifford stay on the practice squad and not Pratt. It's probably the second most surprising to me. And the third is keeping only 5 linebackers, like we said, despite Christian Welch having a pretty good offseason, having a base scheme that requires 3 linebackers instead of 2, so you need more than ever. And Brian Gutekunst saying they're going to keep more linebackers this year. They kept the same amount as last year. Obviously, all of this is still subject to change. Waivers are going to process tomorrow. Packers might make some claims. Some of the Packers practice squad players might not be available to the Packers anymore. They might get picked up by other 53s. But we'll just have to keep an eye on that. And like we said earlier, for all of that news, stay tuned to @FatherSonPacker on Twitter. We tweet out whenever we have roster moves like that, injury reports, and like we said, everything else. Whenever we have new episodes out, once again, that's @FatherSonPacker. We're going to transition soon, Dad, to doing 2 a week. Are you ready to get into regular season form? We'll be doing pre-games and post-games for every single game once the season starts.
Our next episode
is going to be a pregame.
Is going to be a pregame.
And an actual NFL game pregame.
That's
yes.
exciting. Our
I'm
next
excited.
episode is going to be a pregame episode.
The offseason felt so long, but we'll finally have some real football to talk about, and we can't wait to talk about it with you. Once again, @FatherSonPacker on Twitter. Once again, please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. Keep an eye here. We'll be doing 2 a weeks. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.